Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Ashraf, I'll come back to you perhaps. And how do you evaluate the performance of the Ministry of International Cooperation?
Can I talk about the whole government, not just the Ministry of International Cooperation? And I mean, not just talk about this government. Let me answer the question that you just asked, Nader, before we went out on the break. And what are some of the strongest, most hindering aspects that are keeping our economy from growing in Egypt, developing the right manner? And that is not just the government, but it's the whole administrative concept of what we have here. We have public and state companies. Right. We have very large inflated ministries. Okay, so if we're going to look at our administrative system that has a public servant ratio to citizen higher than that of China, okay, and that is one, we're talking about almost 7 million employees in the public sector. So here, before we start moving towards globalization, sustainability and development and competitiveness and all of that, we've really got to find a solution to one of the biggest problems, and that is that you have 7 million public servants.
Only 1 million of them are enough to keep the work going up.
Right.
And if we take that ratio and put it either on factories or we take it on ministries or administrative institutes or companies, the other thing is the role of the government itself. Whether it's a large government or small government, so we agree that we don't need a large government. We need a much smaller, more efficient government with maybe 1 million people or so that will make things a little bit, I think, better. But then we have to always think of the social aspect of the other 6 million people, and we have to find a solution to them. There is no other alternative than downsizing the government. The other issue that we're faced with, and we have to look at other countries as examples, and how fast we have to take this specific pace of reform, and that is the role of the government as a participant within the market itself, within the business market itself. Right. While the role of the government needs to remain as a very, very strict regulator and enforcer of the market itself, it has taken upon itself a role where it competes with the private sector, competes with international investors, as a matter of fact. So you're trying to attract international investors, but you will compete with them as a government, not even as a private sector. Yes. And they're not doing a very good job of it. We don't have a very strong public sector that is competitive either domestically, regionally, or internationally. Right. We don't want to talk about a privatization program because we had a very bad experience with that here in Egypt pre-2011, but it's not a wrong thing to start re-revising again in our own localized approach to it. Right. The central bank, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, you'd know more than me on this thing. I don't think it's going through, but they were suggesting that maybe 10 public banks would be IPO'd on the stock exchange. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do, but for us, it gives us an indication that there is now a little bit more leeway within the government to understand that state assets, we have to start offsetting some of these state assets one way or the other. Now, another solution is to manage them efficiently ourselves. Right. For us to be able to have or re-revise a privatization program that would adjust the markets again, and that's what we need is a market adjustment. Right. For us to be able to do that, we have to have efficient state enterprises that are capable to be sold, that are viable to be sold to foreign investors. And hence, as management, we would have to take these decisions of letting go employees, becoming more efficient, really becoming more efficient enterprises. So that is one of the problems that we're facing. And no matter how much investment we try to bring into the country, post the infrastructure investments that the Egyptian government is already doing, there will be no proper economic future and development for Egypt unless you're able to balance that. Now, the second thing that we have to take a look at is what we call equality within society. Right. Now, the revolution in 2011, and as we moved on, sort of seemed to the rest of the world as a matter that was between the rich and the poor of Egypt, without taking into consideration that the middle class are really the basis and the cornerstone of any society and any nation. Right. So the problem isn't between rich and poor. We want the rich to be richer, we want the poor to become richer, and we want the middle class to expand. Now, our monetary policy, or our fiscal policy per se, has now been very much directed towards a very socialist approach to how we're going to develop our economy. In addition to some of the measures that we're taking, for example, that are impacting our premise within global trade, and that is increasing customs on what we call luxury items. Right. So here you are trying to tell the world that I'm open for global business. I want to be the hub for Africa, and I want to be that, a gateway to the Middle East, but at the same time, I'm going to start implementing some really drastic measures on my trade and my customs. That comes at a time when your association agreement tariff dismantling schedule is now going into effect, which will allow European products into Egypt at zero customs. So now we're creating new customs to get away from the agreements that we have already signed and are now coming into effect almost after 17 or 18 years. Now, that being said, as economists that live in Egypt, not theoretically, we understand that there is a very major social aspect that we have to be very careful with. It was the reason behind the revolution in 2011, and that we have 48% of our population under the poverty line. So if I had a presidency or a leadership that was managing our economic reform program at a very fast pace, then that would have been a problem. Despite the fact that that is the right thing to do, to move as fast as we possibly can, remove subsidies as fast as we possibly can, and really go into maybe a period of austerity measures that can rebalance what we're doing. But we have to take our pace of reform with this social aspect in mind as we move forward, but at the same time work on the other sides, which is the infrastructure, and that's what we need right now, is the infrastructure, the legislation that comes out from our supposedly new parliament that will be able to create the environment that will eventually not, and always the focus of Egypt when we travel abroad or we go abroad, and that's some of the issues some countries have with us. This win-win situation isn't always the case. We go and ask for investments, but very little investments. For example, Kazakhstan is a great country to invest in, but there weren't Egyptian businessmen. You didn't hear about any Egyptian investments within Kazakhstan itself during the visit. Okay, and that's not a win-win situation because they also have growth and they have employment and they need investments to be coming in. So we have to first saturate our local market, which we have a problem with. And that was part of the customs, increase in customs that they're doing. And that's supposed to give an incentive to local manufacturers to start improving their productivity and their quality and their efficiency, to be able not to export, but to be able to serve the local market and keep a little bit of the foreign reserves that we don't have very much of. But has this been tied with a strategic plan to really upgrade manufacturing? So you took a decision on increasing customs, but you have not set a clear strategy on how you're going to at least open the 4,000 or 5,000 factories that have been closed down since, I believe, 2011 or 2012. So if it's not a cohesive strategy and approach where one part leads to the other, instead of the ad hoc attitude that we have from our government right now, where each ministry basically works as if it is a separate island in a separate country, and none of the performance of the government entities is actually in tune with the pace of what the presidency and the leadership is doing. There is a mistranslation of the vision to a strategy.
Do you also, it was a pleasure having you, Mr. Ashraf Naguib, Secretary General of the Egyptian Asian Business Council. Thanks very much for coming in. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Do join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, here on Now TV International. I'm Nancy Sarah Barakat, signing off. Thank you.